This is the Marriage Podcast, and I'm your host, Alexandra Stockwell. I'm a physician turned relationship and intimacy expert, and I specialize in showing couples how to have incredible, passionate relationships. I myself have been married for 25 years. My husband and I have 4 children and full professional lives, and we've created an amazing relationship. If you want to deepen your understanding of your own relationship and learn to access new heights of emotional, sensual, and erotic intimacy, you're in the right place because I will show you how. Let's dive in. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Marriage Podcast. I am so excited for this interview, which is with John Schinnerer and Joree Rose. I'm so excited for multiple reasons. One is because the three of us have incredible chemistry and pleasure speaking with one another, even though we've never spoken before. And we really just had our first conversation start a few moments ago. So you're going to be able to hear all of that right up front and at the beginning as we build rapport with one another. And Joree Rose and Dr. John Schinnerer are each incredible professionals in their own rights, as well as sharing an amazing relationship with one another. I don't usually read the whole bio, even though, of course, my guests are remarkable, but I want to just pick out a few things because you just would never know them unless you hear them in this moment. So Dr. John Schinnerer, like the interesting things besides his Ph.D. and all of his education is that he was an expert consultant for Pixar's Inside Out. And I think I'm going to skip the other 3 paragraphs of all of his amazing achievements.
That's fine.
And let it be like that, because we know that Pixar would only be asking you if, yes, you went to Stanford and established all of these things. And I want you to share about your work in the show, but I'm going to leave it at that. And Joree Rose, you and I met in an entrepreneurial, somewhat personal setting. And I just love your journey as a therapist. And I feel like you've really found your voice in a very unique way to be a proper licensed marriage and family therapist. You've written books. You are well established in the professional world of therapy. And yet you share who you are. You let people who listen to your podcast, Journey Forward with Joree Rose, feel you in a way that's really unusual for therapists. So that's my somewhat quirky introduction of 2 amazing professionals.
So I'm going to right off the bat. First of all, I love what you put out of our introductions. And I'm just going to say thank you for what you said about me, because it felt like you named one of my highest values, which is authenticity, coming through in my work. So thank you for seeing that. But more importantly, so John and I met on Tinder, of all places. And there's a bigger story there we can talk about in a moment. But one of the things that really attracted me to his profile was that he was a consultant on Pixar's Inside Out. And I'm like, oh my God, that is so hot. Like it was such a turn on, because it was this indication of, wow, here's a man who got emotional awareness, and here's a man who's evolved, and here's a man who's stepping into that in this amazing way. So I love that you pulled that out of his bio, because it was one of the things that attracted me to him.
I think there's a word for that, and the word is sapiosexual. So aroused by ideas.
Yes,
Yeah.
I love sapiosexuality, but I think there's a little bit more.
Oh, definitely.
There's like the reason I pulled it out and what it means to me personally is that to be a consultant on Pixar's Inside Out, and I'm presuming you are a consultant on the emotional elements. Is that fair
Correct.
to say? Yeah. So that means that not only do you have high emotional intelligence and are able to express that in a way that people in multiple fields can really understand, but you also have found your way to blend the academic ivory tower Ph.D. achieving side of yourself with industry and entrepreneurial endeavors, as well as found a way to translate it to meet the public on the big screen. And so the reason I pulled it out is partly because it's a charming thing to know and obviously attractive, as Joree has illustrated, but also because it points to a really broad skill set that is frankly uncommon among people who are in the service industry working one-on-one or with groups to help people improve their personal lives. So what do you want to say about yourself?
I'm flustered, but I think Thank you. Very nice. I think when I was young, I always was enamored with the idea of the Renaissance men from, Italy, the Middle Ages, like Da Vinci, Michelangelo.
You're a modern day Medici.
Well, yeah, I don't know if I can go that far, but I guess that was a goal at some point.
Okay, well, I feel like what is in your bio, including all of the details and the awards you've won and the places you've presented and been honored, it is a modern day Renaissance man for someone who is a therapist and coach.
Well, I think the modern day Renaissance is actually the blending of intellectual, emotional, and physical for this idea of modern masculinity. Because I think traditional masculinity has been more physical and intellectual and left out or suppressed the emotional 90%.
Yeah, say more. And I want to name that your website and your podcast, it's called The Evolved Caveman. And that's actually brilliant marketing. But also there's a way in which it gives permission for the burping and the farting too, as well as the emotional sensitivity. That's what that name evokes for me. Maybe it's because I'm influenced listening to How to Train a Dragon with my kids. What?
Do you know me?
I do have 3 sons and a husband. Maybe that's it. But talk to me, what happens when people find you, let's say specifically men, whether they have anger management issues or they're already emotionally intelligent, whoever it is you're working with, are people responding to the evolved or to the caveman part?
I think it's aspirational. Early on in my podcast, I had a guest come on and he kept referring to himself as the evolving caveman. And I was like, oh man, just missed it. That's it. Because I don't think the evolved caveman implies that we're done, that we finished. And I don't think we've ever finished. I think we're always learning and growing and stepping out of the comfort zone. But one of the things that fascinated me is I'll give you just the real quick journey of my professional life. So I wanted to start with positive psychology. That was really lukewarm when I started out 16 years ago. That led to me doing anger management, which was primarily with men, teenagers and adults. And I got tired of that after about 10 years because angry adolescents are like pulling teeth. It's challenging. And then I went to businessmen and executives and immediately recognized that the biggest point of their pain was in their relationship at home. And so I started teaching them relationship skills, which led to this more recent work in masculinity and how we're socialized as men in this man box culture, how we're socialized really as boys and teenagers, and how it cuts us off from 2/3 of the emotional spectrum. And it really screws us up in our relationship as adults. And my argument is that it undermines our shot at happiness.
Will you define the man box culture? I've never heard of that. And I read it and I was like, oh, I know that is an excellent description, but let's hear you define it.
Sure. So when we're young, we assimilate rules. We're socialized, and it can be by parents, it can be by siblings, it can be by peers, it can be coaches or teachers. But we learn these rules. We just kind of incorporate them into our being, like men are tough, men don't back down, men don't feel, men compete. I mean, there's a whole slew of these rules. If you go and ask young men, what does it mean to be a man? And this was work that was actually done. But the big one for me is men don't feel. And what happens when you're young, think middle school or high school, is, do you mind if I swear? Because I'm going to put some...
Depends how exotic your swears are. You can do some basic ones.
Traditional insults that we get growing up. And so as a young boy or a young man, if you show too much sadness or fear, someone will say something like, don't be a pussy, don't be a bitch, don't be a little girl.
Okay. I just want to tell you something because I have 3 sons. My youngest turned 9 recently, and he is a super skillful athlete. And so he spends time at the skate park, which has been the only thing open during the pandemic, and is hanging out with skate park kids who are 12, 13, 14. I'm in my 13th year of homeschooling. We don't have a television. We have a very wholesome home. So he's not exposed to all these things. And so it's been really something to help him distinguish between swear words that it's okay to say, even though we don't approve, and those which he may never say. And one of the ones which is arisen is pussy. And so he said to me, he can do flips and he's a great skate park kid. And then, he gets in the car with me and he says, what's pussy? Does that mean scared? And so I said, no, pussy means really strong and able to do really amazing things. And so he took that in, and then he said, I don't think that's how they mean it. And I said, yes, they don't understand what pussy really is. And you're right. The way that they mean it, it's to say that you're weak, but that's not what pussy is. That's just how they understand it.
Those three insults are the epitome of femininity.
Yes.
And so, masculinity, we learn that it's anti-feminine. It's don't be a girl, don't be female. And then on the other side of things, if you show too much joy, love, romanticism, excitement, you get something like don't be a fag, don't be gay. And so it's, masculinity has been said to be a negative identity in that it doesn't really tell you what to be. It tells you what not to be. So it's don't be gay and don't be female. But so we get these insults, and I don't think it takes many of these insults before you jump back in the man box and you're like, wow, I don't want to do that again. That hurts. It's embarrassing. And so what are we left with as adult men that we can publicly display without fear of humiliation? And I would say it's three things. I would say it's lust, stress, because when I say I'm stressed, I'm implying I'm busy and important, or the big one, anger. And so a lot of our emotions get funneled into that anger lens, and, it's irritation, frustration. And we know like depression comes out as irritability as men. I've seen anxiety come out as anger. I've seen guilt, shame, and sadness. And embarrassment. Thank you. And so we become kind of emotionally constipated. And if happiness is by definition largely an emotional phenomenon, and we're cut off from 2/3 of our emotions, how the hell can we be happy? And we know from positive psych that positive emotions are fleeting, fragile, that they whisper to us, they're quiet. And most of the men I talk to don't even know when they're experiencing a positive emotion. Many men mistake tiredness, relaxation as tired. So part of this becomes building emotional literacy and learning to identify how you feel in the moment.
Can I add on to some of that as well? Because the next step, and also a lot of the work that we do together, is the very skills that men have also been socialized to be successful are not the skills necessary to be successful in relationship. So while they're thinking they're doing their job as a good husband by being a good provider, because that's what they've been raised to believe a good husband does, it then completely disconnects the partners. And they're like, but wait, I'm doing everything I was told to do. Why aren't you happy with me?
Okay, so that is a magnificent spelling out of the context, which I think any self-aware, thoughtful, observant adult can hear and then recognize the truth that is manifest in our culture abundantly. So having established that, for somebody listening, either a man who recognizes himself in that description or a woman who interacts with men in this situation, and whether or not your partner is that way, we're all interacting with men that way, either because we are one or because we're interacting with men. What is the very first digestible step or pivot or shift that a listener can take to be part of changing that situation in a very direct way with specific people in their lives?
If you're talking about men, I would say the first thing to do is slow down, to stop doing. So many of the men that I work with just do, as if they're running away from themselves.
Okay, so slow down. Let's actually define that. I'm assuming that doesn't mean sit and watch a football game. What does slowing down literally look like? Like, let's just picture there's a man who has walked in the door. He's at home. What does slowing down look like in that moment?
And this is where Joree's expertise comes in. She's the mindfulness one. But it's about slowing down, focusing on your breath, not doing. It's about being. And so part of it, one of the things I work with men is get your attention out of your head and into your body, because emotions are embodied. So you can pick up what you're feeling best by paying attention to little tells within your body.
Will you give an example of, like, if I say to you right now, what are you feeling? Will you give an example of a tell in your body that you're experiencing now or sometime today?
Right now, I feel excited. So I've got a little bit of tightness in my chest. I can feel my heart rate's a little bit up. My hands are they're perspiring a little bit, which is
okay. I love your response, John, because a little bit of tightness, a little bit of increased heart rate, like slightly, you didn't say sweaty palms, but something like that.
Yeah, pretty much the same thing. I was trying to be polite.
Okay, but that is exactly the thing that someone could feel and think, oh, I'm anxious. And you're so clear that you're excited.
Interesting you point that out because you're exactly on point. So the interesting thing about those two, anxious and excited, same physiological tell. And, could be constricted throat, definitely tightness in the chest, heart rate goes up, might be a little sweatier. But those are the same for excitement and anxiety. The only difference is in our cognitive interpretation. So the only difference is in how we think about it.
Okay, I just want to slow down and let this settle. Mostly because this is the kind of thing that if we go too quickly, it's very easy to miss, because what you've just shared is gold, because anybody listening has access to making this pivot, because you're not changing anything except, you said it in the therapist language with shifting the cognition. I'm just going to say it in a much simpler way, which is just shifting how you interpret your experience. So the very same experience, you might think, oh, I'm anxious. Let me have a beer so I don't feel this way anymore. Instead, I think the three of us are inviting you to say, oh, you're feeling excited. Like, let yourself enjoy the joy.
And I'm going to interrupt that to say, we might not yet know to interpret it as excitement. So to answer your question, what I would say people need to do right off the bat is to be in compassionate and curious awareness, because in absence of the awareness, we're missing what's happening. So even just to notice compassionately, because to me, the opposite of compassion is judgment. So we're not wanting to judge ourselves or our partner. We're just wanting to notice what's arising, the dynamic we might be stuck in, or the dynamic that may be arising, but to enter into that awareness with a curiosity to just say, wow, this is really interesting. What's coming up for me right now? Can I be curious about it and give it room to exist without automatically denying, resisting, ignoring, or pushing it away because it might be unclear to us, or it might be new or foreign or uncomfortable. And I think in relationships, this is the interplay constantly with couples and how they communicate, how they engage, their patterns, their dynamics.
Yeah. And that phrase without judgment is huge, because I see so many men, like, they get depressed, right? And then they think, oh man, I shouldn't feel depressed. And then they get mad at themselves for being sad or depressed. And then they feel guilty about being mad, about being sad. And it just creates this negative downward spiral.
The institution of relationships have an entirely bigger expectation, as well as, the more isolated, COVID aside, we have become. We are not in villages. We rely on our partners to be so much.
So how does that work? Like, you're both so articulate for your message, but will you take us into something that arises between the two of you and how you navigate it?
Can I share one story first?
Which one?
Well, I was going to talk about the drive to Mendocino.
Oh, yeah.
So John and I have been together for a little over 5 years. We met on Tinder after our divorces. The first, I would say, 1.5 to 2 years of our relationship was kind of like bliss. Like, one of John's favorite words to teach people is limerence. Yeah. Do you know what limerence is? I'm sure that the audience.
Yes, but define it.
Okay.
Go ahead, you define it.
Limerence is that floating on air, optimistic, pie in the sky, doughy-eyed. It's the lust, not quite love feeling that you have when you're first in a relationship. Rose-colored
lenses, right? So you see all perfection in your heart. And usually that doesn't last forever. I mean, it never lasts forever. It usually doesn't last all that long. For John and I, it lasted a pretty long time. And then kind of some reality set in, where we started getting stuck. And I'll be honest, I used to get stuck on the fact that, but John, you teach this, you should know how to do this. And that was one of the stories I was telling myself. And that would keep us kind of in a stuck dynamic. But we continued to have to learn how to get unstuck in our own stories. And because he and I have the awareness, we have the ability to say, is what's coming up for you right now something related to your ex? Is it something related to childhood? Or is this really about me? Because we bring so much to our partners that may have absolutely nothing to do with them. So I think we've gotten really skilled when we're stuck to help clarify what actually is coming up, because John and I are both highly sensitive. And the majority of the time, that's an asset to our relationship, because we have really great attunement with one another and great emotional sensitivity and awareness and capabilities to see each other. But sometimes it's like, which sensitivity is going to take hierarchy?
If we're both hurt.
And even though we know to assume positive intent in our partner, that neither one of us wants to hurt the other, we're still sensitive and it still is going to hurt. And so part of the dynamic is, how do I, number one, name what's happening in a way that my partner can hear it? Because I know I need to be able to communicate my feelings to John in a way he can hear me. So I have to be aware of his sensitivities and even how I can communicate so it doesn't get automatically shut down where his story is taking over.
It might be helpful to hear an example of that. Like
Go ahead. So
a poor
you
example
can give the
versus
example.
a good
Yeah.
example.
But that's,
okay.
I think, some of the helpful context to
So,
understand.
given what you just said, let's say we're in an argument over something silly.
Well, let's tell the Barcelona story.
Okay, so Barcelona, we had just come from Paris. We're in Barcelona. We've been traveling that day, so we're kind of tired. We're both hungry. I was starving. And we get into the hotel and we sit down in the restaurant and we order an appetizer. And Joree says, I got to go to the bathroom. I was like, okay. And she goes to the bathroom, and God bless the waiter. He brings the food like that. And so I've got this plate of appetizers staring me in the face. I'm like, I am so hungry.
And I want to paint the picture. We're in this hotel in Barcelona. This restaurant is all windows overlooking the ocean.
Beautiful.
The appetizer was like a traditional, expensive Spanish ham on some bread with tomato. And it was like $30 appetizer. It was like not just like some chips and guac kind of thing, right? It was like, to me, this quintessential Spanish appetizer in this beautiful setting. Okay. That's some context.
While there was probably 10 of them on the plate, 20, 30.
I think there was 4 or 6.
No, it wasn't that many. So I took one and I ate it.
So I come back from the bathroom and he's already eating.
And there's one missing.
And I was really hurt of like, I was gone. Like, I just had to pee. Like, you couldn't wait for me to come back to like take this moment of like, oh my gosh, we're in Spain. Oh my gosh, look at this view. Oh my gosh, look at this amazing food. Let's share in this moment together. And I was really hurt. Now, did he do anything on purpose wrong? No, but I was still hurt. Me saying I was hurt, John doesn't like to be embarrassed, and John doesn't like to feel that he's done something to hurt me. So even me naming that can spiral him at times in an old story of I'm not good enough. And, we've all got our stories. Well, this little teeny thing of him eating the appetizer, and there was still plenty left, not 20, maybe 4, but there was still plenty.
16.
But for whatever it was, we both got really stuck. And honestly, Alexandra, it took about, we even disagree on the timing, but I'm right. I've got a better memory. It took about 3 days for us to fully repair.
And consider that, like, this is over something completely asinine, right? And neither one of us has done anything wrong. It's a values conflict, right? I was hungry. I wanted to eat. She wanted to share together. And she often likes to take a photo of the food before we eat it. But we were both angry and hurt. And so we know the value of repair attempts. So one of us would make a repair attempt, sweetheart, I'm sorry that I did that. Next time I'll try and do better, that kind of thing.
And here's one of the things I struggle at John's first repair attempts because he's still emotionally flooded. He's still spinning in his emotion of shame, embarrassment, anger, whatever's coming up for him. And to me, it doesn't sound as compassionate as I need to feel my pain acknowledged.
The tone of voice is lacking, right? I think it feels kind of monotone.
And so even in the repair attempt, even the simple thing as tone comes into play where I can't receive it because it doesn't feel like he means it. Because if like my story, I'm telling myself, if you really knew me, you would have known to either wait for me, or if you really knew me, you'd know to like really take my hand and hold it and look me in the eyes and look more apologetic. And I have to let go of the fact that it has nothing to do with him not knowing me. It has nothing to do with him not loving me. This is what a repair attempt looks like in the beginning for him as he's working through all of his emotions he's feeling. But we were not yet skilled that much in our relationship to know what was going on there. And our repair attempts just kept missing.
And so there's 2 parts to a repair attempt. One is I have to make the repair attempt. The other part is she has to receive it well. So if either one of those doesn't work well, you keep missing like this. So I would make a repair attempt. She would make a repair attempt, and we just kept missing. We couldn't connect. And I remember we'd done this for a couple of days, and I was just like, in my head, I'm like, I got to make another repair attempt. And I'm like, shit, I don't feel like making another repair attempt. And
it's exhausting at times.
It struck me in that moment that you have to make the repair attempt before you feel like it often. That if you wait to feel better, it's going to be a long time waiting, or it doesn't come because it doesn't proceed. The feeling better happens when you reconnect.
So during this time when we'll say, Joree, you're waiting for an invitation to repair, a repair attempt that feels good to you. What are you doing on the inside?
What I did then versus what I do now is different with greater practice and greater awareness.
What would you do now?
What I would do now is I would recognize that I'm hurt and that it is my internal work to help understand what's coming up for me. And I don't always need John to heal my wounds.
I'm so glad you said that, because I really want to emphasize that piece, because we do hurt one another. But that doesn't make it the other person's job to heal the hurt. It's not actually possible almost all the time.
So let me give you a more current example. That's kind of our quintessential story we go to. But more recently, there was a time where we got stuck, and the pattern tends to be when John's heard about something, his coping skills to help quiet down his emotional brain, to settle his physiology so he doesn't say something that may not be so skillful. His pattern is to get quiet and to withdraw. Now that activates my deepest insecurities because I've got abandonment issues. So when he goes to withdraw to help heal what he needs to be able to actually come back for the repair in a way that he knows I will find more meaningful, I go into this anxiety of abandonment. And so I start to chase because I'm grasping and clinging for connection because I need to feel soothed over this abandonment story. And he needs to continue to withdraw to heal his internal story around, I need to be able to, whatever you're feeling in that moment, right?
Well, I'm trying to calm myself down.
And so even just recognizing this dynamic of the withdrawal not being personal, because in the beginning, I was taking that withdrawal incredibly personal. I was telling myself, if you really loved me, you'd be here even if it was hard for you. Whereas I now recognize it has nothing to do with about being personal. It's about he's doing his internal work and I need to allow him to do his internal work. And I've got to deal with my own anxiety. That's my story.
Okay, amazing, because this gets right to the question that I love asking all of my guests, because I really believe that relationships are the ultimate context for personal growth. So what have you learned about yourself, Joree, as a result of being, in relationship with John? You're going to be married sometime soon, right? Or
one day. Yes.
Yeah. One day. Yes. I just wanted to finish that sentence accurately. So what have you learned about yourself as a result of being in a deep, lasting relationship with John? And then I'll ask you, John, after.
I've learned to trust that distance does not mean abandonment. I've learned to trust that John and I have incredible positive intent with one another, and we're going to at times hurt each other. And I'm learning to not take that personal. And by therefore, how I can heal my own story, because it has very little to do with him. And so part of that is the last time that happened, I almost felt embarrassed and shameful for how I was chasing and grasping. And so when I realized, okay, let me understand with some more compassionate awareness what's coming up for me, and let me have incredible trust in the relationship as I do when I'm not triggered, right? I know the trust is there. I know he's not going anywhere. So let me rebuild a new story of trust, number one, but also let me figure out what is it I most need in those moments. How can I self-soothe that anxiety? How can I let it be okay to be uncomfortable? And how can I also draw some boundaries in a really healthy way to say, you know what? I can see you're stuck. It's hurting me in this dynamic. I'm going to give you your space before you withdraw from it, because that feels self-empowering to me to offer you what you need so then I can actually go take care of myself.
Beautiful. John, what have you learned about yourself?
There's a couple of things that come to mind. One is I've learned how amazing it feels to have permission to feel whatever it is you're feeling without judgment. So when Joree and I have been going out about 3 months, I came over to her house after work for dinner. And, I'd seen, 7, 8 clients that day, and I was wiped out. I was tired. I was a little bit stressed from what they've been sharing with me, and I was out of sorts, and she knows it when I'm out of sort. And
it pisses him off when I know he's out of sorts because he can't hide. Well, I see him.
It's a great and terrible thing simultaneously.
Understood. Well understood.
And so anyways, at the end of the night, I'm getting ready to go, and I'm giving Joree a hug, and I say, hey, listen, I'm sorry that I was, out of sorts and kind of irritable, and it's not about you. It's, just from clients at work. And she looked at me and she said, look, my job is to accept all of you, the good and the bad. And my jaw just kind of hit the floor. It's like the feeling of getting manacles taken off of you, because no one had ever told me that before, that it's okay, whatever you're feeling is fine. Now, I think you can go further into that statement, but we don't have much time, so I won't go further into that. The other thing that I've realized in this relationship is how universal some of these dynamics are, in particular, the anger for men. And anger is a secondary emotion, so that it comes on the heels of, let's say, hurt in relationship a lot, or embarrassment. But that it leads to most of those four horsemen of the apocalypse, a la John Gottman. So, there's criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. But think of stonewalling. I've talked to a lot of men about how their anger leads them to stonewall because they're getting flooded emotionally. And their thought is, I don't want to say anything that's going to hurt her. So better for me to just shut down.
Yes.
And so really I've pushed for getting more and more comfortable and curious and non-judgmental around my own anger so that I can get through it and let it go more quickly.
And I've learned to take that less personal.
Which then makes it easier to have the courage to inquire further for you, John.
One of the things that, we both kind of laugh at is like, at the end of the day, it's like, damn it, we're human. We hate that about ourselves, right? Like, we want to be able to say, because we know all of this and we teach it, and clearly we're passionate about it, doesn't mean it's always easy to put it into practice. And I think for everyone who's listening, I think that's a huge reminder that, even two professionals who are doing this every single day, it still is different to put it into practice all the time.
Yeah, we don't ice skate through our relationship daily. But there's one other point I wanted to make, though, because I think it's important. So there's research that shows that women can identify complex emotions quickly, within minutes. For men, it can take hours, if not a day or two. And so a lot of times I hear women that are upset with their partner because they won't re-engage in the discussion or the disagreement. But men need more time to figure out what exactly they are feeling, because they're not that skilled in it. They've never been rewarded for it. They've never been encouraged to do it. In fact, just the opposite. They've been mocked and humiliated for even putting a toe in that.
I remember so many times, I've been married for 25 years. We've been together a little longer than that. And thank you. And so my husband certainly was masterful with shutting down when we first got together. And I remember the first time, he is a brave, competent, successful man. And he was so hesitant to share an unpleasant emotion. And I remember so clearly when he said, well, when you do that, I feel like whatever it was that was icky. And he was sure I was just going to crumple, that it would just be impossible. And instead, honestly, I felt turned on. I wasn't happy that he had a complicated, unpleasant feeling. Of course, I wasn't happy about that, but totally separate from the content, the much more powerful emotional experience was, that's funny that there's a siren going by right now, but anyway.
Emotional emergency.
Yes, exactly. But the much more potent emotional communication was his inviting me into his world, even if that invitation came with not feeling so good about something I'd done. And he was just shocked that I was ready to make out. I wasn't offended at all. And maybe we'll kind of leave it there. And I want to invite each of you to share how people can follow up with you if anyone wants to really learn to be more compassionately curious, evolve the caveman elements. Do you want to begin, Joree? How can someone...
I can't go by without just commenting on the last thing you said, because early on, it was such a turn on when John would share any amount of emotions that it became a joke that if he were to say, I feel anything, he'd be like, are you excited?
So I'd be like, hey, Joree, I feel hungry. You wanna?
And it was, for all you men out there who are listening, and I hope there's as equal number of men as women, understand that is an immense turn on for women. An immense turn on to be able to hear vulnerably from your partner. It gives that access in. It says, I trust you. It says, I welcome you to see me. I can't say enough about that. So I love that you mentioned that.
Yeah. And I just want to emphasize that It's not that you feeling angry or you feeling resentful is the turn on. The turn on is that in sharing it, it's this exquisite invitation for more connection.
Yes.
That's what the turn on is. And so it's important not to be confused about that.
Absolutely. Well, and a la Brene Brown, vulnerability breeds connection.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so where can people keep
Okay,
going
so the
with this
best place to
conversation?
find me is my website, joreerose.com. From there, you'll get access into my podcast, all my social media, my books, and my memberships and meditations. And so the one-stop shop would be joreerose.com. And of course, the podcast is Journey Forward with Joree Rose.
And I'll have all of that in the show notes.
Perfect.
Okay, what about you, John?
And for me, it's the evolvedcaveman.com or guidetoself.com. And you can find me on social media at those sites. Then we also have, is it ultimaterelationship.com or the ultimaterelationship.com?
The Ultimate Relationship. We also do joint couples work. So in addition to our individual work, we've got our joint work. And I have to say, even if I weren't partnered with him personally, he's really the only person I refer to professionally. To have such high respect for the work that each of us does is really amazing. But I have to say, we do amazing work with couples together. Oftentimes I'll work with the women, he works with the men. Sometimes we've even then swapped and have me work with the men and him work with the men. And then we come together jointly. And one day, I'm not sure 2021 will be the year. We had to cancel one for last year, but we were planning a couples retreat to Costa Rica. And that will one day happen again when it's safely to do so. But so for couples who want to work with us, it's a really exciting way of working because it's really education based, like a lot of the things we share just to help understand. But we also bring a lot of ourselves into the work, and couples have given us feedback to say it is so helpful to see what that looks like. It is so helpful to hear how you guys get through this and have the vulnerability to share it. So the ultimaterelationship.com is where you can find both of us as well.
And the last piece is Joree just came out with a book called A Year of Gratitude.
Mine
You can find on Amazon.
actually going to be delivered tomorrow. I can't
Awesome.
I can't wait to read it. And we can have a separate link to that in the show notes too. Well, I want to thank you both so much for your time, your insight, your stories, and again, to just really underline how much I appreciate that as well-trained mental health professionals, you choose to share what's happening inside your own home and in your own hearts and relationships. I think that takes courage and incredible generosity. So thank you.
Thank you so much. It
Thank
was a
you for
blast
having us.
talking with you.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Marriage Podcast. Please rate and review the show on iTunes. It really makes a difference. And if you have a question or a comment, reach out to me via my website at alexandrastockwell.com.